Hey guys, my name is Kurayami. Welcome back to another episode of Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. Today we are getting into chapter 10. So let's just jump in, shall we? The mess in the fireplace was cleaned up when Angel came back, but Hosea was gone. She expected to feel relief in his absence, but she didn't. Instead, there was a hollowness inside her that made her feel she was drifting in an empty space. Was he out there somewhere thinking up a suitable punishment for her outburst? What a fool he must think her. She could bet his sister had known how to build a fire, cook a fine meal, plow a field, and do whatever else he needed doing. She'd probably know every wild vegetable and plant from the Atlantic to the Pacific at a distance of 100 feet. She probably had been able to smell a wild game and then shoot and dress it herself. Dejected, Angel sat on the floor beneath the hearth and looked at the barren fireplace. My life is just like that. A bare, cold, useless hole in the wall. She was stupid and clumsy. Oh, but she was beautiful. She touched her face. Or she had been. She got up. She had to do something. Anything. She needed light and warmth. She watched Hosea build a fire often enough. Maybe she could do it herself. She took the wood chips and piled them, then laid kindling in small branches. She took the flint and steel from the mantel, but no matter how hard she tried, she could barely strike a spark. Michael stood in the doorway, watching her. He'd gone out for her earlier and had seen her sitting beside the creek. So dejected, she didn't even notice he was there. He stood by, watching over her until she wandered back to the house. He might as well have been invisible. She was so tightly wrapped in herself and her own misery and dark thoughts that she was blind to everything else, especially him. Cursing, she put her fist against her eyes. Michael put his hand lightly on her hair and felt her jump. "Let me show you how to do it." He hunkered down beside her and held out his hand. She handed him tools. "First of all, you can't expect it to get perfect the first time. It takes practice. Like cooking stew," he wanted to say. Like living a different way of life. Angel watched him lay the fire and strike the flint. A spark caught, and he blew on it gently until the shavings smoked and began to burn. He added small kindling, then larger branches. Within minutes, the fire was going. He sat back, his forearms resting on his raised knees. He intended to enjoy the fire and Mara's closeness, but she had other ideas. She took the poker and choked the branches off and scattered the kindling the wood chips. She smashed every last ember. Kneeling closer, she laid the fire just as he had done. She did it exactly right, then struck the flint and steel. She made it spark, but it didn't catch. She tried again, resolute, and failed. Her burned hand hurt abominably, but she clutched the tools with such absolute determination that her palms began to sweat. With each failure, her chest ached more, and the pain was so permeating, so deep and disabling that she sank back on her heels. "I can't." What was the use? Michael's heart ached for her. She had never once cried, even when she was out of her mind with fever, and God knew she needed to. "Let go of it, Mara." "Fine." She put the flint and steel between them. "You do it." "That's not what I mean. You try too hard. You expect to do everything right. It's not possible." "I don't know what you're talking about. All I want to do is build a fire." "You don't even speak the same language," he said flatly. He might as well be speaking English to a Spanish-speaking California girl. "It's like fighting me when you don't have to." She refused to look at him. "Build it again so I can see what I did wrong." He did as she asked. She watched closely and saw that she had done nothing wrong. Why hadn't her fire caught? The hearth was full of blazing light, and he had done it all in about a few moments. Her fire wouldn't even start, but his would last the night. Angel came to her feet abruptly and stepped away. She hated his competence. She despised his calm. She wanted to destroy both, and she had only one weapon she knew how to use. She stretched sinuously, aware of his gaze upon her. "I suppose I'll get it eventually," she said and sat on the bed. "My shoulders ache. Would you massage them the way you did before?" Michael did as she asked. He needed the tension from her muscles, increasing his own. "That feels good," she said, and the sultry tone sent his pulse racing. Her hair slid back and was like silk over his working hands. Then he put one knee on the bed. She put her hand on his thigh. "So that's it," he thought ruefully. She figured she couldn't build a fire in the grate, so she would build one in him instead. It hadn't taken her any time at all to do it. He drew back. Angel felt his retreat and followed him. She slid her arms around his waist, pressing herself against his straight back. "I know I need someone to take care of me, but I'm glad you came back for me." "Jesus, give me strength." Michael closed his eyes. When her hands moved, he caught her wrist and withdrew from her embrace completely. When he turned, Angel was ready. She knew how to act the role. She knew all the words by heart. Soft, broken words. Calculated words to tear at his heart. To make him feel his rejection had hurt her. Stir guilt in with the hot blood boiling. Give him reasons and excuses to give in. The last evening in the brothel had already weakened him. He was a lamb ready for the slaughter. Angel came to him again, shutting down her emotions and using her mind instead. She pulled his head down and kissed him. Michael dug his fingers into her hair and kissed her back. She used what she knew to wage war against him. She didn't know anything but building fires or cooking stew, but she knew about this. He disentangled himself, gripping her shoulders. "You're so relentless," he said, unwilling to surrender. Angel stared at him and saw he wasn't fooled. He knew exactly what she was doing and why. She tried to pull away, but he wouldn't let her. "It doesn't have to be the way you know." "Let go of me," she struggled frantically. Michael saw she was hurting herself and released her. She stepped well away from him. "Did all that make you feel any better?" "Yes," she hissed, lying through her teeth. "God help me." She had wanted him to feel more than physical discomfort. She wanted to annihilate him. She wanted to see him squirm like a worm on a hook. She plucked herself down on the willow chair, her neck stiff, and stared straight ahead. Michael looked at her blankly. Her silence screamed profanity at him. She thought she had lost, but did she think he had won? He went outside. Does this woman have a compromising bone in her body, Lord, or is this what I've got to look forward for the rest of my life? Jesus, she doesn't fight fair. She's fighting you the only way she knows how. Michael went down to the creek and knelt, splashing cold water on his face. He stayed on his knees for a long time. Then he went to the barn for the metal wash tub. When he came in, Angel kept her back to him. He set the tub before the fire. She looked from it to him and away again, saying nothing. Had she made him feel dirty? Did he need a bath now to wash her off? He spent the next hour toting the water from the well and heating it in the black pot hanging over the fire. He tossed a bar of soap in the water. "I'm going for a walk," he said, and left. Surprised, she went to the door and opened it. He kept on going until she lost sight of him in the trees. Frowning, she closed the door. She took off her clothes and stepped into the tub. She scrubbed her hair and body vigorously, pouring warm water down over her to rinse, then stepped out. She wanted to be finished before he came back. He had left a towel draped over the back of the chair, and she rubbed her skin and wrapped her hair. She dressed quickly. She sat down before the fire and unwound the towel. Her hair was a tangled mess. She tried to work her fingers through the knots. Jose didn't come back for more than an hour. When the door finally opened behind her, She glanced up at him. His dark hair was wet. Suppose he had bathed in the icy stream. She felt a twinge of guilt and doubt. He moved about the cabin restlessly. She went on, pushing her fingers through her hair, aware of his every movement. He opened the trunk and slammed it shut. He paced past her. He dropped a brush in her lap. She picked it up and looked at it. Her throat closed up. She looked at him and slowly began to brush her hair. He stood with his hip resting against the table and watched her. She didn't know what he was thinking. She didn't know what to say. "Don't ever do that to me again," he said. He was pale, and she felt something move inside her, curling tight and sinking deep. "I won't," she said, and meant it. Michael sat in the willow chair before the fire. His hands relaxed between his knees. He stared at the flames for a long time. "I guess I got a good taste of what it's been like for you." She glanced up in surprise. "What do you mean?" He looked at her. "It doesn't feel good to be used. Whatever the reason." Something twisted inside her. She held the brush in her lap and stared at it miserably. "I don't know what I'm doing here with a man like you. I knew the moment I saw you that I was going to marry you." "So you told me." She tilted her head. "Look, mister, let me explain a few facts of life to you. A farmer alone for weeks on end coming to town. You could have looked at the south end of a northbound mare and known she was the right one for you." "It was your young, stone-cold face," Michael said. He gave her a rueful smile. "Then the rest of you." His gaze flickered down over her. "You are dressed in black like a widow. Magawan was beside you. I guess he was making sure you didn't run away." She didn't say anything for a long time. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about any of it. But it was like a foul stench in the room. It lingered. She couldn't get rid of it. It was there under the clean smell of the soap he had given her to use. The foulness was inside her, running in her blood. "Do you remember when you asked me what kind of name Hosea was and I said prophetic?" She began brushing her hair again slowly, but Michael knew she was listening to him this time. Hosea was a prophet. God told him to marry a prostitute. She glanced at him in a mocking smile. "Did God tell you to marry me?" "Yes, he did." She was scornful. "He talks to you personally?" "He talks to everyone personally. Most people just don't bother to listen." It was better to humor him. "I'm sorry I interrupted. You're telling me a story? What happened next? Did the prophet marry the prostitute?" "Yes." He figured God must have had a reason. A good reason. The same as he probably did. Did this Hosea beat the sin out of her? I suppose she crawled to him on her face and kissed his feet for saving her soul. No, she went back to prostitution. Her stomach dropped. She looked up at him and searched his face. He just looked back at her, solemn, self-contained, enigmatic. I can't pronounce that word. "So God isn't so all-powerful after all, is he?" she said quietly. God told him to go and get her back again. She frowned slightly. "Did he?" "Yes." "Just because God told him to? No man would do that." "Yes, and because he loved her." She got up and went to look at the window and the darkening sky. Love? No. I don't think that was the reason. It was his pride. The old prophet didn't just want to admit he could hold onto her all by himself. "Pride drives a man away, Mara. It drove me away from you the last night in paradise." He should have listened to the Lord and gone back. He should have dragged her out of there no matter how much she kicked and screamed. Angel looked back over her shoulder at him. So she stayed with the prophet after all? No. She left him again. He had to buy her out of slavery a second time. She didn't like this story very much. And then she stayed? No. She kept leaving. She even had children by other men. Her chest felt heavy, defensive. She mocked him. And he finally stoned her to death. She said wearily, sarcasm dripping. Isn't that right? He finally sent her to where she belonged. He didn't answer, and she turned her back on him again. What's your point, mister? Just say it. Someday you're going to have to make a choice. He didn't say any more, and she wondered if that was the end of it. She clenched her teeth. She wasn't going to ask him if the harlot ever stayed with the prophet, or if he finally gave in to her. Michael got up, opened 2 tins of beans, and poured them into a pot. In a few moments they were warm, and he served them. Sit and eat with me, Mara. She sat down with him at the table. When he bowed his head and prayed, the anger came up fast inside her again. Trying to ignore him, she began eating again. When he looked at her, she gave him a tight, challenging smile. You know what I think, she said. I think God had you marry me to punish you for some great sin in your past. Have you lusted after many women, mister? It does plague me on occasion, he said, looking over her with a rueful smile. He ate the rest of the meal in silence. She envied his peace and self-control. When he finished, she took his plate and stacked it on her own. Since you did the cooking, I'll wash the dishes. She didn't like the dark, but it was better than staying in the cabin with him. He might start telling her another of his rotten stories. A really nice one this time. Something about a leper or someone with a running sores. When she finished the dishes, she sat by the creek for a while. She was aching all over, and she knew she had attempted far too much today. But just listening to the water soothed her unsettled nerves. What am I doing here? She said to herself. What am I doing here with him? A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the cottonwood, and she could swear she heard a soft voice. She turned, but no one was there. Shivering, she walked back quickly and saw Hosea leaning against the doorframe, waiting for her. His hands were shoved in his pockets. Stepping around him, she entered the cabin and put the dishes away. She was tired and wanted to go to bed. Stripping off her clothes, she slipped quickly beneath the quilts. Then she lay there thinking about the girl going back to prostitution. Maybe she had a duchess who had her money too. Maybe the prophet had driven her half crazy the way this farmer was driving her crazy. Maybe she wanted to be left alone. Did the prophet ever think of that? Angel stiffened when Hosea slid in bed beside her. She only had herself to blame. Give them the taste of a kiss, and they wanted the whole meal. Well, the sooner it was done, the sooner she could sleep. She sat up, brushed her hair impatiently off her shoulder, and looked down at him with grim resolution. No. She was surprised at the look of impatience he gave her. No. No. Look, mister, I can't read your mind. You have to tell me what you want. I want to sleep in my bed with my wife beside me. Taking a strand of her hair, he tugged lightly. And that's all I want. Perplexed, she lay back down again. She waited for him to change his mind. After a long while, his breathing deepened. She turned her head cautiously and looked at him in the firelight. He was asleep. She studied his relaxed profile for a long moment, then turned away from him. Angel tried to put space between their bodies, but Michael Hosea filled the bed the same way he filled the cabin, the same way he was beginning to fill her life. Well, guys, that is end of chapter 10. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, or not, whatever. If you want to listen to more or watch more, consider like, commenting, subscribing, but do whatever you want. I don't really care. I'll see you in the next video. Bye, guys.